That's our final song. At this time, the one doing the feature for us, Sister Angela. At this time. Be seated.
Good evening, everyone. Happy Sabbath to everyone. This evening features on the pioneers and the reformers are mainly for the juniors. I don't see many juniors in here. One, two, two. You're a junior in heart? Okay. All of us are. Okay. Our story this evening, our story in the pioneers continue this evening with the story and the life story of J.N. Andrews. Can anyone tell me his first name? Juniors. We go to the juniors at heart later. Yeah, I got two. Yes, Josiah, what's his name? What's his name? Pardon me? John who? Yes. John Nivens Andrews. Yeah, that's how you call it. I'm pronouncing it wrong? Nevins. Okay. Okay. Good. Now, John was born in 1829, hundreds of years ago. 1829. As a young man, about the age of 17, he had left his ambitions to be a lawyer and a statesman. His uncle had later become a congressman, and that was his ambition because he admired his uncle a lot. But he left it behind to accept the Sabbath truth. In Paris, Maine, 15-year-old Maria Stotwell was living with her parents in the home of John's father. Reading a tract on the Sabbath, so this is why it's so important that we spread the word of God through tracts and books that we print, because reading a tract on the Sabbath, Miriam decided to check the Bible for herself. She looked up every scriptural reference and concluded that she should keep the seventh day Sabbath, even though she expected to be the only person around who would be observing it. However, Miriam was not one to give up without an effort, and she gave the tract to her older brother. He kept the next Sabbath with her. Then on Monday, she handed the tract to John Andrews. After he had read it, she asked, "Are you willing to keep the right Sabbath, Brother John?" "Indeed I am," came the answer, prophetic perhaps of the courage shown later by Elder Andrews. "Will you keep it with me, Miriam?" Soon both families, because of the experience of the children, both families and others as well were keeping the Sabbath. So to those family and the other adults around, who brought the truth to them, young people? On the Sabbath, who brought it? The young people in the group, the 17-year-olds that brought the truth to them. And eventually all of them were keeping the Sabbath in that area. Okay? So young Andrews began at 21 to preach and write. And in 1850, in the infancy of the Advent publications, he, along with Joseph Bates and Samuel W. Rhodes, formed the publishing committee, which stood behind the editor, James White. So that was James White, the group that worked with James White when he opened the printing ministry. Adventist historian Arthur Spalding gave his description: "Year by year, young Andrews grew in stature, deeply studious, a quiet, unassuming man. He was yet a dauntless advocate, and his clear-cut reasoning was apparent in each article he wrote." So he began preaching at 21. An earnest scholar, Andrew mastered Latin. He didn't just know it. He mastered Latin, Greek, Hebrew, and French. He memorized the New Testament from Matthew to Revelation. He memorized the New Testament. Andrews was the first Adventist to apply Revelation 13 to the United States and was first to advocate the scriptural sunset-to-sunset observance of the Sabbath. He was the brother-in-law of another devout scholar, Uriah Smith. It is said that Elder Andrews was a leader in the early days of the church in the much-needed move of organization of the Adventist believers and for growth of the ministry. Eventually, the work began to spread into Europe, and there was a call for someone, a missionary, to go to Europe. Joseph Bates was now dead in his grave at this time. James White had just been elected president of the General Conference again, and the young work in California was being developed largely by John Loughborough. No others in the front-rank leaders could go to Europe, and the finger pointed to John Nevins Andrews. He had been the third president of the General Conference at one point. Later, Ellen G. White told the European believers, "We sent you the best man among us." So there was a call from Europe for someone to come up to push the work up there, and the brethren in America prayed, and eventually John Andrews was chosen. And she said, "We have sent you the best man among us." He was the one who was, as a young man, had exclaimed, "I will exchange 1,000 errors for one truth." Telling the story of Elder Andrews' acceptance of the challenge, a man by the name of John Carlos said, "A camp meeting was appointed." So this is the camp meeting where they chose John. John was chosen. A camp meeting was appointed to convene a short distance west of Battle Creek in the summer of 1874, just prior to the departure of our first missionary to a foreign field, and Elder Andrews was present. When the expansion of the message was dwelt upon, the notice was given that he would soon leave for Europe. So they had told, he had known at this time that he would go to Europe. A change came over the meeting. Elder Andrews, who had never appeared so solemn, at once seemed altered in appearance. So at this camp meeting, Andrews got up to speak, and as they looked at him, his appearance started to change. His face shone with such pronounced brightness that as I saw him and heard his apparently inspired words of quiet contentment to be anywhere with the Lord, I thought of the story of Stephen, whose face was as it had been the face of an angel. So as John spoke, his face became brighter, and the meeting completely changed. It's as if the Spirit of the Lord came into that meeting. This was a John Andrews that we heard about, that did a great work in Europe. During the latter part of the Civil War, the newly formed church, the Seventh Adventist Church, began to feel considerable pressure from the draft. The draft is when you are asked, once you're an able-bodied young man, you have to go and fight. You have no choice. While the Adventists were unanimous in their sympathy for the federal government, they had already adopted a particular stance that they would not be bearing arms and shooting anyone. The government had made provision for non-combat service for those who are conscientiously opposed to bearing arms and who were prohibited from doing it because of their faith. So in the summer of 1864, the church decided to send someone to Washington to present to the proper authorities the Adventist position. Chosen as a representative for the Battle Creek, Michigan headquarters was John Andrews. He took ample material for his task, including an endorsement from the governor of Michigan. In Washington, he was kindly received. His case was accepted, and orders were issued by the Marshal General to assign Adventists, as well as other denominations that want to bear arms, to hospitals or other non-combative duties. So the path was blazed for Adventist soldiers who would face these problems up until today. So if an Adventist is going to apply for the army, they can go into non-combative duties. all because of the work that J.N. Andrews did. When J.N. Andrews bravely sailed from his homeland, his wife in 1874, his wife had died in 1872. So for 2 years, he was alone with his 2 children. So here he was on his way off to Europe by boat, which took really long, and he sailed from America across to Europe in 1874 with his 2 children. He knew not whether he would give his life, he would give his life to a strange country. But that is exactly what happened. So he went off to Europe not knowing where he was going, what was going to happen, or anything like Abraham. He set out not knowing what was going to happen. And he trusted in the Lord and went. In October 21st, 1883, in Switzerland, this devoted worker of God was cut down with tuberculosis. I call it right? I pronounce it right, cis. Okay, thank you. In the land to which he came to witness for Christ. He was in the prime of his life, age 54. His daughter Mary had fallen victim to the same dreaded disease in 1878. So when she went to Europe with him, she lived only 4 years after that. So his wife died 2 years before he left, and his daughter died 4 years after he got there. So he worked before the Lord through all of this, trusting him. As Job said, though he slay me, yet will I trust him. At the age of 17, his daughter had died. But Elder Andrews had built a strong and solid foundation. He had launched a publishing program and an evangelistic work that made Europe the second stronghold of Seventh-day Adventism. He had been a warrior in the forefront of the battle, and his faith and courage were in no way diminished when he peacefully fell asleep in Jesus. Today, his memory is perpetuated in the name of the first Seventh-day Adventist university, Andrews University in Bering Springs, Michigan. And one of his books, History of the Sabbath, is still a standard work of the Seventh-day in the Adventist Library. So we have learned that if you fully commit your life to Jesus and his cause at an early age, he can use you to continue and to push the truth even further. Regardless of what happens, what troubles or trials may come upon you, he can use you. And at a young age, he gave his life to do a work for the Lord. Therefore, the Lord could have used him to push that work. He chose the Lord, and the Lord used him. Thank you.